Section number 8 of the Children's Wonder Book. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Janine Mary Solheim, Danvers, Massachusetts. The Children's Wonder Book, Section 8, Behind the Wardrobe, by Mary P.W. Smith. "I hate the old thing, so there now!" cried Ned Langdon, throwing his loathed arithmetic with all his might across the room. "I just wish there was no such thing in the world as arithmetic, especially fractions. I know someone invented fractions just to torment boys." Ned was far from being a stupid boy. He really shone in history and geography. He stood fairly well even in grammar. He was a great reader and wrote the best compositions of any boy in his room. But he so detested arithmetic that a willful stupidity seemed to becloud and benumb all of his faculties whenever he went into that class. The blunders he made and the way in which he didn't know his lesson and couldn't do his problems were the despair of his unlucky teacher. Today he had fallen into even worse than usual disgrace, and had been kept after school to do problems when the first skating of winter had come, and the moment school was out all the other boys had rushed off to Bullhead Pond to try it. Their merry voices echoed back into the gloomy, deserted schoolroom, darkening already as the short day declined toward evening, and in the growing shadows Ned and the master had stayed until nearly supper time. It was too late to go skating when Ned was finally released, with the order to take his arithmetic home for evening study. He had rushed home, feeling himself an abused, persecuted martyr, and had amazed his mother by breaking into the room with a wail of despair already recorded. "Ned, I am surprised!" exclaimed his mother. Before she could say more, she was further surprised by Ned's giving his arithmetic a hearty kick that sent it flying nearly to the ceiling. "Ned," said his mother, "pick up your arithmetic and go to your own room. Your supper will be sent to you, and by, when you are in a more reasonable frame of mind, I will come up and see you." Ned sulkily obeyed, glaring at the hated arithmetic as he mounted the stairs, feeling it the cause of all his troubles. His supper was brought up by good-natured Nora, with whom Ned was a great favorite, and who did not hesitate to tell him that, in her opinion, it was a shame, a downright shame, so it was, which rather comforted Ned, even though, at bottom, he knew he was in the wrong, and that he was getting no more than he deserved. As the darkness deepened, Ned began to grow sleepy, and just to keep himself awake, thought he would get his skates out of the wardrobe and see if they were in good order for tomorrow. On opening his wardrobe, he was surprised to see a small door in the rear that he never remembered noticing before. Opening it cautiously and peeping through, to his amazement he found himself looking outdoors, into a country new to him. A pathway, starting from the little door, wound invitingly away over some pleasant-looking hills that hid the distant landscape. Ned was of an adventurous turn of mind, so it did not take him long to decide to squeeze through the little door and set forth on the pathway, resolved to see what lay beyond the hills. He walked rapidly on, full of curiosity, and soon found himself at the top of the hill. Below him lay spread out a wide tract of country, varied by farms, villages, rivers, and brooks. But Ned saw at once that it was all strikingly different from any country he had ever seen. Everything was so regular, exact, precise. The fields were divided by fences into either squares, parallelograms, or triangles. The rivers ran through the land like straight, deep ditches with no curves. Whenever their course changed, they made a right angle instead of a bend, and the little brooks, which were also rigidly straight, flowed into them at exact right angles. All the houses were alike, square with doors in the center, and precisely as many windows on one side as on the other. As Ned walked wonderingly down the hill, He could not but notice that even the trees and bushes grew up perfectly perpendicular, like walking sticks, with exactly as many branches upon one side as on the other. It seemed to him that their leaves and twigs took on the form of figures. Ned thought this must be only his fancy, so he rubbed his eyes and looked again. No, wherever he looked, a bewildering lot of 5s, 6s, 7s, 8s, etc., waved about him. This is queer, thought Ned. He noticed, too, that the trees, instead of being scattered about the fields irregularly, here a clump, there a group, yonder scattered single ones, stood with almost painful regularity in rows, each just so many feet from its neighbors. The effect of the whole landscape was very prim and precise, and Ned wondered at it greatly. As he saw some boys playing in front of a house he was approaching, he resolved to question them. The boys had a game not unlike 12 men Morris, marked out on the ground with pegs, and were jumping at right angles from peg to peg. They stopped and stared as Ned advanced, and asked them, "What country do you call this?" "Why, arithmetic land, of course," answered the largest boy. Ned hardly knew what this meant, but pursued his inquiries. "What makes your trees grow so regularly?" "Why, everything has to be planted by rule, of course," replied the boy, who, like his companions, looked extremely keen and wide awake. He was very thin and active, and seemed to cherish a fairly good opinion of himself. "If that field is 20 rods square, what is its area?" "I don't know," said Ned, without stopping to think, as was rather his habit in arithmetic. In truth, he so detested it he would not try to think. "He don't know! He don't know!" shouted all the boys derisively. "Why, stupid," said the first boy, "it contains 400 square rods, of course. Now, if you have 324 trees you wish to set out in that field, in how many rows will you place them, and how far apart will the rows be?" Ned, disgusted to find that this was what was involved in being in arithmetic land, answered again, "I don't know. I should never set trees out like that. I should just let them come up anyway." "He'd let them come up anyway," shouted the chorus of boys. "What is your name?" asked Ned of the oldest boy, who seemed to be regarding him with silent scorn. "My name is A," replied the boy, "and these others are B, C, and D." Ned shuddered. How often had he declared that he hated A, B, C, and D, who were always dividing things in such foolish, unnecessary ways, involving no end of fractions and consequent trouble for boys. But A was so small, though his face looked so keen and old, that Ned was moved to ask one more question. "How old are you?" "That's easily told," replied A briskly. "D is 6 years old." "But I don't care how old D is," interrupted Ned. "I asked your age." "No matter," replied A severely. "All questions must be solved by rule. D is 6 years old. 2/3 of D's age is just 1/3 of my age. What is my age?" Ned would not answer, but noticing that C had some apples, and feeling hungry, he said, "Give me an apple, will you?" "Ha!" exclaimed C. "Don't you wish you might now? I have only 4 apples. If I divided them equally among us 5 boys, what part of an apple would each boy receive?" "I don't know and I don't care," snapped Ned, his appetite for apples suddenly gone. "He don't know and he don't care," shouted all the boys. Ned resolved to leave such disagreeable companions and push on, hoping for better things ahead. Remembering that, as it was only Tuesday, he still had some of the week's pocket money left, he resolved to walk on toward a village in the distance, where he would, of course, be able to purchase a supper. He ventured one more question, however, as he turned to go. "How far is it to that village?" he asked. "If you walk at the rate of 2½ miles an hour, you will reach it in as many hours as 1/3 of 15 multiplied by 2, rattled off A. "He can't tell, he can't tell, stupid, stupid," shouted the boys, as Ned, with a puzzled look, turned and walked off. Presently a man overtook him, driving a fine horse. "Will you give me a ride, please?" asked Ned, uncertain of how many miles of walking lay before him. "Certainly," said the man, who had a kind, pleasant face. "Hop in." In Ned hopped, and away trotted the horse with a good will. "This is a fine horse," remarked Ned, by way of opening conversation with his new friend. "What does such a horse cost here?" "Well, I'll tell you," said the man pleasantly. "I bought a cow and 2 sheep at the same time I bought the horse. The cow cost twice as much as the sheep, and the horse 3 times as much as the sheep, and they all together cost me $180, so you can easily see what the horse costs." "Oh, yes, indeed," said Ned hastily, hurrying to change the subject. "What a nice, thrifty-looking orchard this is." "Yes," replied the man, "it's mine. This is my farm. 1/2 of these trees bear apples, 1/4 peaches, 1/8 pears, 7 trees bear plums, and 3 cherries. Now, how many trees should you say there were in that orchard?" Ned would have been puzzled to tell, but luckily, as he thought, just then he saw over the stone wall a hound in hot pursuit of a fox. The fox was a long way ahead. Over the ground they sped like lightning toward a piece of woods. "Ha!" shouted Ned, standing up in his excitement. "See there! See that fox run! How the hound springs along! I wonder if he'll catch the fox." His friend seemed also somewhat excited by this spirited sight. He said, "The fox had 76 rods start, but that hound runs 15 rods to every 10 the fox runs. In how many rods will the hound catch the fox?" "Oh, I hope he won't catch him at all!" exclaimed Ned. "I hope the fox will get away." The man looked at him in mild surprise, as if this were not the sort of answer he had expected, but said nothing. Ned, on his part, now carefully refrained from stirring up his new friend by asking any more questions, and they drove on for some time in silence, until they came to a group of men working on a stone wall who seemed, by their loud angry tones, to be quarreling. Ned's friend stopped. The men seemed to know him, and the employer said, "See here, X, I'll leave it to you. C claims that he has the job of building this wall, but I can't wait for him to do it alone, and I've hired A and B to help. A and B can build it in 8 days, but with C's help they can do it in 5. Now how long do you say it will take C to do it alone?" Ned was so fearful they might refer the question to him that he hastily said to his friend, "I think I'll walk on now. I'm ever so much obliged for the ride," and, scrambling down, hastened on by himself. After trudging on a while, he began to feel tired. It was growing dark, and the road ahead seemed to run up a high hill, steep and rough, looking particularly hard to climb. Ned was therefore glad to see a man approaching, driving a flock of sheep. "Good evening, sir," said Ned, as the man drew near. "What a large flock of sheep! You must have 100 at least." "No," said the man, "not 100, but if I had as many more, 1/2 as many more, and 2 sheep and a half, I should have 100. "How many—" But Ned hastily burst in. "Excuse me, I'm in a great hurry. I'm tired and hungry, and I want to get to the next village as soon as possible. How far off is it?" "If you walk 10 miles, began the drover. 10 miles! exclaimed Ned, his heart sinking within him. "Don't interrupt. If you walk 10 miles less 8, and divide the remainder by 3, you will have the distance to Fractionville, the next village." "Fractionville!" exclaimed Ned, horrified. "But I don't want to go there, of all places." "But you have to go," replied the drover. "But don't be frightened. The road isn't so hard as it looks. 1 step at a time, and you get to the top before you know it. You seem to be a stranger in these parts, so I'll tell you something to your advantage. Don't be afraid of the fractions. They are fractious-seeming fellows, to be sure. But if you meet them bravely, you'll find out they're not so bad as they look. Good night. I must push on. The man to whom I sold these sheep is coming to meet me. We were 10 miles apart when we started, an hour ago. As he travels 3 miles an hour, while I only travel 2, you can easily tell how soon we shall meet." "Thank you. Good night," said Ned, hurrying away. At the foot of the hill he was rejoiced to see a small country store. "I'll have something to eat before I go another step," thought Ned. Examining his pocket, he found he had only 15 cents, and decided to content himself with crackers and cheese, with possibly a few apples. He stepped into the store and said to the storekeeper, a withered, precise-looking old gentleman who peered sharply at Ned through his glasses, "I'll take half a dozen of those crackers, please. How much are they?" "Ahem," said the old gentleman. "Those are expensive crackers. I bought 8 boxes of them and paid for them with cider at $4 a barrel. It took 6 barrels of cider to pay for them. There are 20 dozen crackers in a box. Now, if you will tell me what 1/2 dozen cost me, and add 1 cent and a half, which is my profit, that will be what you owe me." The old gentleman rattled all this off in a matter-of-course way, as if this were quite the ordinary way of selling crackers. "I can't tell," said Ned, gazing hungrily at the crackers. "You can't, hey? Then you're not so smart as the boys of your age in these parts." "I'll pay whatever you say," said Ned meekly. "We don't say," said the gentleman testily, replacing the box of crackers on its shelf. "People have to find out for themselves." Ned thought he would make one more effort. "How much are your apples apiece?" he asked, looking longingly at a basket of large red apples. "I sell oranges," began the storekeeper. "Apples! I want apples!" shouted Ned, thinking the old man must be deaf. "I sell oranges," continued the old man sternly, "at 3 for 6 cents. Apples are worth only half as much as oranges. Now, what is the price of an apple?" Ned's head felt so confused by all he had heard in this puzzling land that it was some time before he ventured to falter timidly, 1 cent. "QED," said the storekeeper, brightening up and handing Ned 5 apples in return for his nickel. Ned had barely taken one enormous bite when a farmer entered the store to buy cloth for a suit of clothes. He selected a piece and said he would take 3 3/5 yards. The storekeeper said it was $5 a yard, and turning to Ned, remarked, "He expects to pay this for cloth with butter at $3 a box. How many boxes will it take?" Ned mumbled something about being in a hurry, plunged out the door, and began to rush up the hill, so anxious to escape these perpetual problems that he forgot, for the moment, that Fractionville lay just ahead. But suddenly, through the growing twilight, he saw strange forms running down the hill, a whole swarm of them. Instinctively Ned turned to flee, but in an instant he was surrounded and seized, while a wild yell of triumph went up from his captors. He realized that he was in the clutches of his deadly foes, the Fractions. "We have him at last!" shrilly screamed the leader of the band, whose name Ned soon learned was 8/9. "Hold him fast, 2/4. Don't let him escape. Bring him right to the problem quadrangle and we'll put him through. He hates fractions, does he? We'll show him." Seizing him at once in their bony hands, they bore him up the hill so rapidly that he was too much out of breath to speak, even had he been inclined. As they swept on, 8/9, noticing Ned's apples, said, "Subtract those apples from the prisoner and divide them among the company," which operation was quickly and accurately performed, and Ned was left to brew ruefully over the problem. "If a boy has 5 apples and you subtract 5 apples from him, how many apples will he have left?" At the top of the hill, Ned was borne by his captors into a large building, and into its dining room apparently, as a long table was set in the apartment. Ned was now able to see the Fractions. They had high, bald foreheads and wonderfully sharp, quick eyes. They seemed to be clothed in fragments. No one had on a whole suit. Each wore a broad belt which seemed to divide him into 2 parts. All were maimed, Some lacked a leg, some an arm, some a foot or a hand. But whatever portion was missing, all had heads, and they were all so wiry and active that a few trifles of limbs gone seemed no obstacle to their activity. A delicious smell of dinner now penetrated the room. A bell rang, and, to Ned's relief, the fractions seemed to be genuine boys in their appetites, at least, judging by the headlong rush they made for the dinner table, bearing Ned with them. Ned now remembered the drover's advice, not to be afraid of the fractions, as they were really very good fellows at bottom. He began to think the man must be right, and to feel in better spirits. Presiding at the head of the table was an exceedingly keen, wide-awake-looking man, whom Ned afterward learned was the original lightning calculator. Ned was seated next below him. Soup was the first course. The lightning calculator took off the cover of the tureen, letting out a most appetizing, savory steam. Ladle in hand, he said to Ned,
"This ladle holds 1/4 of a pint of soup. The tureen holds 1.5 gallons. If I give each boy 2 ladles full, how much will he receive?"
This almost took Ned's appetite away, big as it was. In dismay, he faltered out the old familiar school answer, "I don't know." The fraction boys were all holding up their hands, wriggling them frantically and grinning derisively at Ned. "Next," said the lightning calculator. 8/9, who sat next, rose to his feet and rattled off glibly. "If in 1 gallon of soup there are 4 quarts, in 1.5 gallons there are 6 quarts. If in 1 quart there are 2 pints, in 6 quarts there are 6 times 2 pints, which are 12 pints. 12 divided by 24 equals 12 24ths, which, reduced, equals 1/2. Therefore, each boy will receive 1/2 pint of soup."
"Those who think the answer correct may raise their hands,"
said the lightning calculator quickly. All hands went up instantly but Ned's, and all the boys were served with soup except Ned. "Can't I have any soup?" whined Ned.
"Certainly not, sir,"
said the lightning calculator severely.
"Those who don't know can't eat in Fractionville. Keep your wits about you and look sharp when the next course comes."
While the rest were eating, Ned had time to look about him. The walls of the room were made wholly of blackboards. The somber effect, however, was relieved by the chalkwork which covered them from top to bottom, problem upon problem, so that it really made Ned's head ache to look at these decorations. There was not a whole dish upon the table. The cloth consisted of 3 joined, and, as Ned noticed later, the food was all divided into sections or portions. The soup was now carried out, and roast meat and vegetables brought in. Ned pulled himself together, resolving to be very bright.
"How much beef, at 18 cents a pound, can you buy for $1.80?
Ned was asked. 1 pound, he shouted, jumping at a hasty answer, then seeing his mistake, but too late.
"Next,"
said the lightning calculator, before the fatal words were hardly out of Ned's mouth, and he saw there was no meat for him, while all the fraction boys laughed and seemed to enjoy their roast beef with livelier relish because Ned had none. Nor could he tell at once how many bushels of potatoes, at 45 cents a bushel, you must give for 6 pecks of onions at 15 cents a peck. So he had no vegetables. When the bread was passed, he did manage to say that, if bread were 10 cents a loaf, he could buy 10 loaves for $1 and 20 loaves for $2, so he had a large slice of delicious bread, delicious partly because he was so hungry. A little encouraged now, and stimulated by the atmosphere around him, so to speak, as well by hunger, he actually managed to say that if cheese were 18 cents a pound, and you wished to pay for it with butter at 20 cents a pound, it would take 9 pounds of butter to buy 10 pounds of cheese. So he had both butter and cheese, and he felt that he deserved it, too, after such an effort as that. All this made him exceedingly sharp for his dessert, especially as he saw that it consisted chiefly of lemon pie.
"Now," said the lightning calculator, "look sharp. If 8 pies be each divided into sixths, and those sixths divided equally among 24 boys, what part of a pie would each boy receive?
Ned's mind, strained to its utmost, worked with a lightning-like rapidity never displayed in his arithmetic class. 6 times 8 are 48. 24 and 48 twice, he dashed through mentally, then shouted, 2 sixths. Before the question was hardly out of the lightning calculator's mouth.
Very good indeed, said the lightning calculator. You are improving. You should have said 1/3, but you shall have 1 piece of pie. Your answer was so nearly correct, and I will take your other sixth myself.
4 large watermelons were now brought on. Ned loved watermelon as much as he hated arithmetic, and he had not seen one yet this season, so he looked very animated. The lightning calculator said,
You shall have 1/4 of this melon.
Ned's face shone with anticipation.
If you will divide it as follows, 1/4 to yourself, 2/5 to me, 3/10 to 8/9 there, and the balance to 6/7.
Alas and alas! Ned could not divide it, and the melon was withdrawn from his reluctant hands and placed before 8/9, who quickly and cleverly divided it into 20 parts and distributed it as requested, and was soon reveling in the quarter that might have been Ned's. After dinner, the fractions proposed to play messenger boy. Ned cheerfully followed them, as he liked that game, but the fraction boys played it quite differently from the way to which he was accustomed. Instead of playing it with little figures representing messenger boys on a checkered board, the floor of a large room was marked off in squares. The boys donned messenger caps and hopped themselves from square to square, going forward or back according to their answers to arithmetical questions put by the lightning calculator. It may be supposed Ned did not shine in this game. He was the laughing-stock of all the boys, who passed on far ahead while he stuck again and again on stupidity and was forced to go back to carelessness. Finally he reached inattention, whence he was sent back to discipline, where he had to stand on a dunce block with a fool's cap on his head until the game broke up. Ned was so completely fagged by these agreeable diversions that he was only too glad when the lightning calculator announced that it was bedtime. He wearily followed the fraction boys upstairs into a large room where stood several beds. To his dismay, the lightning calculator said to him,
You will share this bed with 6/7, 5/8, and 9/10. You will easily see what portion of the bed belongs to you.
But, remonstrated Ned, I don't wish to sleep with anyone. I want a whole bed to myself. The fraction boys roared at this. Do hear him, they said. He must think he is an integer. I am, exclaimed Ned, glancing down proudly on his strong legs and arms, where not even a toe or finger was lacking.
Boy,
said the lightning calculator,
it is a wise boy that knows himself. You are not even 1/99. Your grandmother always insisted that you had no head for arithmetic. You have no head.
Ned raised his hands to his head. Alas, they met in vacancy, just where his brain should have been. Horrified at this discovery, he gave a great groan and woke up to find himself lying on the floor before his wardrobe and his mother bending over him with an anxious look. Ned, she exclaimed, still shaking him, wake up! You seem to have been having such a bad dream. Ned sat up and felt his head in a bewildered way. It's all there, he said. Come, Ned, said his mother, laughing. You're not half awake yet. Come downstairs and get your arithmetic lesson for tomorrow, and then you can go to bed and do your sleeping in more comfortable fashion. The next day, when Ned presented himself in arithmetic class, instead of the usual bored, listless, inattentive look and air that were his teacher's despair, his face wore such a wide-awake, smiling look that the teacher was alarmed and watched him carefully, thinking some new form of mischief must be brewing. But when Ned went to the board and actually performed correctly a quite difficult problem in fractions, following it with an explanation so quick and clear that it would have done credit to the lightning calculator himself, the master, equally pleased and surprised, said,
Well done, Ned. I have always told you that you had as good a head for arithmetic as any boy in the room, if you would only give attention and try." In short, now that Ned could see an amusing side to arithmetic, and could fancy himself battling and overcoming his old foes, the fraction boys, he no longer hated it, and that made all the difference in the world. End of section 8.